confirmation hearing set to resume momentarily for President Biden's nominee to the Supreme Court. Judge Ketanji Brown-Jackson facing some tough questions from Republicans in that room throughout the day. Joining us now, Shannon Bream, anchor of Fox News at Night and a Fox News chief legal correspondent. Shannon, great to see you. What have we made so far of what we have seen and heard from the judge and the senators questioning her?
Well, as many of the senators I talked with who had met with her leading up to these hearings said, they found her to be very intelligent, very charming. They thought she would do very well in these hearings. And she has seemed to comport very well with the tough questions that she's gotten. She's had some defenders where some of the Democratic senators have served more as her advocate or defender from their podium perch than as a questioner. But she has gotten some tough questions, some tough pushback, and probing on issues from abortion to guns. But most importantly, people want to know where she stands on her philosophy of the role of a judge. Here is a bit of what she said about that.
I am acutely aware that as a judge in our system, I have limited power, and I am trying in every case to stay in my lane.
So she has talked about not legislating from the bench. That is not the role of a judge, which is going to be music to the conservatives' ears who are there and part of the questioning. They're going to probe more on that and exactly where she is. She likes to talk about that she has sort of a way that she attacks cases versus an overall judicial philosophy. But when you're taking a seat on the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land for a lifetime appointment, people want to know more about what your philosophy would actually be. Now, Senator Graham clearly still smarting from the Kavanaugh hearings, the Barrett hearings. There have been references to even earlier hearings today about how nominees have been treated. And he said there's a bit of a double standard. He thinks, he says, listen, I want to protect Judge Jackson. She doesn't deserve mistreatment, but we have to remember what's happened here. Here's a bit of him going off on that double standard.
But it just appalls me that we can have such a system in America, that if a conservative woman wants to stand out and say, I love my family just as much as you love yours, and my faith means just as much to me as it does you, that all of a sudden there comes some kind of weirdo.
So he wanted to make it clear that Judge Jackson has talked quite a bit about her faith. He wanted to press her a little bit on that and also get her to sort of weigh in on how these hearings have gone with past nominees. She didn't really take that bait, but said that she was glad to be here and to defend her own positions.
All right, two things I want to follow up with you on there, Shannon, because really interesting moments you bring up. One was Lindsey Graham, and he ended up standing up and walking out after some frustration that he felt with some back and forth in that room. I'll get to that in just a moment. But to your point about what we've heard so far from Judge Jackson and her methodology, here's a bit of what she said on that. Listen.
Over the course of my almost decade on the bench, I have developed a methodology that I use in order to ensure that I am ruling impartially and that I am adhering to the limits on my judicial authority. When I get a case, I ensure that I am proceeding from a position of neutrality. It's very important that judges rule without fear or favor.
Okay, certainly a defining moment in all of this on her methodology, but what we just heard from Jonathan Turley towards the end of the last hour in the discussion on Outnumbered, he said we've heard a lot about her methodology, but not a lot on her judicial philosophy, really the point of these hearings. Do you expect that we will hear more about that and get more from her as the afternoon progresses, Shannon?
I do think that we will. And, you know, a number of the members of the committee are attorneys themselves or have served as judges or prosecutors or any of the number of things that are now on her resume, too. So they speak the same language when it comes to really pressing in on how she looks to the text of a statute. She has said, you know, I go back to the original idea of the person who wrote that text, what they meant at the time. So we are getting more of the contours of where she's coming from. But I think because we do have other legal minds and people who have served as judges and prosecutors, they're going to want to pin her down a lot more specifically on that idea of judicial philosophy.
Yeah, indeed. And meanwhile, as promised, here was the moment where Senator Lindsey Graham stormed off. Listen. Okay, I'm told we don't have it. There was obviously an extreme back and forth that we saw on Guantanamo. He ended that exchange, as you just gave us some detail on. Look at the friggin' Afghan government made up of former detainees at Gitmo. This whole thing by the left about this war ain't working, said Lindsey Graham. I'm sorry, we have it now? Okay, let's listen.
As long as they're dangerous, I hope they all die in jail if they're going to go back and kill Americans. It won't bother me one bit if 39 of them die in prison. That's a better outcome than letting them go. And if it costs $500 million to keep them in jail, keep them in jail, because they're going to go back to the fight. Look at the friggin' Afghan government. It's made up of former detainees at Gitmo. This whole thing by the left about this war ain't working.
That was early on in the hearing today, Shannon.
Yeah, he was very frustrated and some back and forth with the Democratic chair of this committee, Dick Durbin. They had talked about Guantanamo Bay quite a bit because Judge Jackson, when she was a federal public defender, was assigned to handle cases for a number of Gitmo detainees. She talked about that broadly today, about the fact that she thinks it's one of the strengths of our constitutional system that people who cannot afford to have a defense will have one provided to them by the government, including people who are detainees at Guantanamo Bay. So she was defending her ability and her work to do that and how it speaks more broadly to our judicial system, seeing it and arguing it as a strength. Now, Senator Graham agreed with her. He said, yes, I agree with you that people deserve representation. That is one of the bedrock foundations of our constitutional system, our judicial system. He said, that's fine. But then he went on from there. And remember, he is not only an attorney, he was an attorney in the military. So he is very familiar with these proceedings on many different levels. He got into this heated back and forth with Senator Durbin about exactly how many people are still at Gitmo, whether they should still be there, what their rights are now. And you could see he got a little heated. And yeah, I'm not sure if it was there on the clip, but at the end, he did get up and walk out. Yeah. He was done with that conversation at that point.
Yep. He got out and walked out of the room. Chairman Durbin said that they expect to resume at 1:30 Eastern time. So that's less than 15 minutes from now. And we will get back to it when it is back underway. Shannon, thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.